Welcome to the Jury Thinks What podcast. Part of the Lawyer Minds ecosystem, the Jury Thinks What podcast discusses everything there is to know about trying cases, from preparing the case before the lawsuit is filed, all the way to trial. And most importantly, how to understand what the jury is thinking. During our journey, we'll be talking to some of the brightest trial lawyers from many walks of life. What makes them successful? What makes them different? Do they have secrets to dealing with the jury? Let's find out. Here's your host of the Jury Thinks What podcast, Saul Gruber.
Well, thank you and welcome everybody to the Jury Thinks What, a podcast by trial lawyers for trial lawyers on the Lawyer Minds ecosystem. The purpose of our podcast is for trial lawyers to come on and discuss different issues that they face every day, hopefully helping both inexperienced as well as experienced trial lawyers all over the country. As always, I'm your host, Saul Gruber from Gruber Trial Consulting, and I ask everybody to subscribe to this podcast everywhere you get podcasts. Today, I'm excited about our guest. It is superstar lawyer from the state of California, Brian Chase. Brian's 8-figure and 9-figure verdicts and settlements are too many to list, and he is known as the auto defect lawyer. And I'm excited about all the things Brian's going to tell us. So welcome to the Jury Thinks What. And we are back to the Jury Thinks What. And again, I am Saul Gruber, your host from Gruber Trial Consulting. And as I promised, here in the flesh is Brian Chase, superstar lawyer from California. And I think we all know Brian. He is the auto defect guy, and we're thrilled to have him. Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, Saul. And, thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. I'm a big fan of yours and what you do. So this is a real honor and pleasure for me today.
Well, I can tell you this, it's definitely a bigger honor for me because we all follow everything you guys do at your firm. And it's not just you. I mean, it's all your partners and associates. Every time I turn around, there's another 7-8-figure verdict coming out of your office. It's pretty darn impressive, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, we have a really good team. So, very fortunate in that regard. We like to try cases. And so, as you and I have talked before in the past, the more you go to court, the bigger the verdicts ultimately become.
That is the God's honest truth. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is, when you and I were both, as we call baby lawyers, we probably started out at firms where there were mentors and people who would be talking to us and telling us how to do certain things and, more importantly, funding the cases. And today I see a lot of lawyers are opening up their own shop and getting excited, and they're not realizing the work that you have to put in to get those $7 and $8 million, 7-8-figure verdicts to get to the really big settlements.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about you. What got you into doing auto defect work?
Yeah, well, the sort of the short story was when I was a kid in high school, the Ford Pinto verdict came out, and the baby lawyers watching this won't remember that. You and I do. But back in the late 70s, Ford got hit for what at the time was a monster verdict, $127 million. And it'd probably be like $1 billion today.
Right.
And I remember learning, and it turned out to be true because I've subsequently gotten these documents, that Ford did an internal analysis and they realized they can fix the Pinto for $5 a car. And they realized it would be, so they had an audit and $5 a car equaled X. And then they said, well, how many units do we have to pay off? People in the cars were called unit. You and I would be a unit.
Okay.
And back in the day, they said, well, it's going to cost us $200,000 per unit. So when that $200,000 per unit number was bigger than the $5 fix, they chose not to fix it. And that's why there was such a monster verdict when that came into being. So I didn't grow up wanting to be a lawyer, but when I learned about that, and then when I ultimately decided I did want to be a lawyer, I went to law school exclusively to do PI with an emphasis on auto products. I didn't just fall into it. It was a driving passion. Yeah.
And now you're head of a large firm. You guys are in Orange County, aren't you?
Yeah, Newport Beach, Orange County.
So, how do you get from being the person who decides to be an auto defect lawyer in law school to having the auto defect firm in the country? How does that process happen?
Yeah, a lot of sleepless nights on the growing pains. One of it, and it's like anything in life, no matter what you desire to do in any career, if it's your passion and you're really motivated to do it and you don't let fear stand in your way, you can do it. So my partner I early on realized that it wasn't satisfying for me to work on the smaller cases. Not that they're not legitimate, not that those folks aren't really injured and really need justice, but I really wanted to do, for whatever reason, whether it's insecurities, ego, a combination of both, to take on these David versus Goliaths. I wanted to do it. So ultimately, finally, one landed in our lap. And rather than refer it out, which everybody told me I should do because they said I was in over my head, I litigated the hell out of it, started trial on it, got a fantastic, multiple seven-figure settlement, and then just built from there.
That's interesting. Let's go back to what you just said, because that's what we hear all the time, right? If it's a products case and you haven't handled products cases, you shouldn't do it on your own. You should refer it out. If it's a medical malpractice, what do you think about that type of advice that we're giving to people?
Yeah, no, if you want to do those kinds of cases and grow your firm, if that's your desire, then you should not do that. You should do them yourself and face your fears, the economic fear, the growth fear of having to learn more, and forge ahead. And I always like to say, and it's not false modesty, it's the God's honest truth. I'm not an idiot, but I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. And I always tell folks, if I can do it, you can do it. We had our first auto defect case. We didn't have a line of credit. We didn't have $1 million in the bank. We were just plunging along, one foot in front of the other, settling $10,000 cases and getting our little fees, and just went from there. So if you have a passion to do, whether it's elder abuse, nursing home, med mal, auto defects, contracts, whatever it is, hopefully not contracts.
Yeah, that's it. You shouldn't have that passion.
Yeah, don't get sucked into the refer out thing. Other than it's a good business model now. We know guys that have these $1 million a month budgets, and they refer out great cases, and there's nothing wrong with that business model at all. But if your desire is to be a trial lawyer and try these big cases, you got to dig in and do it yourself.
So, with these big cases come a lot of pitfalls and issues that a lot of lawyers may not know that to even look for. How do you suggest they go about doing that and learning about some of those pitfalls and ways to handle, let's use auto defects since you're the man. How can they learn that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I am at a point now where I can file a lawsuit. The defendant will call me up and say, let's have a stay on discovery, let our experts look at the car, and then, 3 to 4 months or 6 or 8 months, we mediate the case, 9 out of 10 settle for, whether it's $1 million or $15 million with no time or money in it. By the same token, I have lawyers that start out wanting to do it themselves, which I respect and encourage. And then they get into the case $100,000, within the first few months, and they go, oh, this is too expensive. They call me up, hey, Brian, can you come in on this case? And I say, of course, I'm happy to. And I see that so many times, and that's $100,000 that didn't have to be spent yet.
Right.
And so to answer your question, how do people learn that type of a tip? I have found that most lawyers are very generous. I know my mentors from afar that are now in their 70s and 80s. I used to be able to call them up 20 years ago and pick their brain. And
absolutely,
really good, gifted lawyers will share. I share, other people share. So if there's a kind of case you want to do, rather than just jump in and spend that $100,000 and then have to refer it out because you're in over your head, find out who in your area or even who in the country is really good at that. The good folks will pick up the phone and talk to you.
I've always found on the years that I was that nursing home person that I got a lot more out of picking the phone up and talking to somebody from, California, from Oregon, about how I handle it and what I look for, and sending them forms rather than say, well, refer me the case. Right. I never like to say refer me the case. I like the idea of helping somebody out, sending them everything, because at the end of the day, we're going to do a trial. We're going to do what we're going to do. So why would you ever want not to make your colleague look good? Yeah.
Oh, I always say, and it's just a truism in what we do for a living, we all stand on each other's shoulders. None of us invented the wheel, and we're not really reinventing it. We stand on our predecessors' shoulders, our colleagues' shoulders, and we grow. And there are people that are going to stand on ours, and we should relish that and look forward to it. And I'm at a point in my career now, and I know you and I have talked about this on other occasions. I love mentoring people. I want to fire people up, to go out and do whatever it is their passion is in law, and just kick ass at it.
So let's talk about it a little bit more. So now whether it's auto defect or something else, you're a lawyer 4 years out. You've done pretty well in the auto field, right? You've settled some good cases, maybe even tried a case or two. Now you want to dip your toe into that bigger pond, whether it be medical malpractice, whether it be products, whether it be auto defect. What's the first thing you think someone needs to do when they want to dip their toe into that pond?
Yeah, well, what I would do is I would look for, 2 or 3 or some number of people that specialize in that area. And I would ask them, hey, well, one, if you see them speaking at a conference, if we ever get out of COVID,
Yeah.
go watch them there, watch them try cases. Go watch them speak. I've always learned, and one of the ways I've learned how to do these cases is I consume trial testimony, because people can get on stage in New Orleans or in Las Vegas and say how they do it.
Right.
And half of it's right and half of it's not. But if you go watch a trial or if you go read trial testimony, you know exactly what happened. So I really sort of taught myself by reading trial testimony and then contacting the lawyers and, hey, can I take you to lunch? Can I take you to dinner? And pick their brain.
Right.
And I've just found people to want to be so helpful, because most people we're kind of like a big fraternity or sorority, So that's what I would suggest.
And not only that, I think you said something pretty interesting earlier. I mean, we all, bar none, no matter how humble we are, to do what we do, we have a large ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're just sitting here talking to each other. We could probably do it for 10 hours because we have a large ego. And I think if you start asking that person about how they do things and how impressed you are, they're going to want to help you a little bit more. Right. And who doesn't like a good bottle of wine out to dinner? No. Although when the younger lawyer takes me out, I normally buy the wine, let them buy the food, just because of my particular taste. But there's nothing you can do about that. But I just spoke for the Indiana trial lawyers. And of course it was through this computer because nobody's getting together. And I got at least 6 emails where people were asking me, hey, specifically about timelines. I talked about how to put a timeline together. Do you have any forms for that? And I just sent them all out. Said, yeah, here it is. Here's the way I think. Go for it. Just do me a favor when you put one together, send it to me so I can look at it. And I like that. And I think you're right. Anytime anybody's speaking, that's a great opportunity to talk to them, pick their brain, and ask them for transcripts.
And it seems like, you're very good at what you do, whether it's the elder abuse cases, the trial consulting, and you've already reached the pinnacle of success. And so now I can tell by talking to you, you enjoy giving back.
Yeah.
And you're the exact example of like what I'm talking about. I love to give back. You do. I know the people that when I was in my 20s and 30s and they were in their 50s and 60s, I really like the ones that were that age and still fired up.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, how is that old dinosaur, which I now am, how are they still fired up? And I'm still fired up. And those folks, they'll talk your ear off. It, as you say, it could be because of ego, but it's also, we truly do like to share and give back. It just makes us feel good.
Well, and funny, out of your neck of the way, Kim Valentine's a lawyer who I know very well over the years.
Great lawyer.
And we had Kim come out to New Jersey a couple of years ago to speak at our Boardwalk seminar. Uh-huh. And we had a blast. And we all, everybody goes out to dinner afterwards, and whoever's there, come on along. You're right. It's the fraternity. It's the brother and sisterhood. And Kim was giving out information like there was no tomorrow about a particular owner. I forget his name, but it's a very Jewish name, an owner of a nursing home out in California that she just destroyed. I mean, and you know how good Kim is, just destroyed him. And she was giving out transcripts, and this is exactly how you do it. And it was great because everybody learned.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect example of someone that's at the top of their game in their field, and she's incredible. And I've been on panels with her, and she loves to talk about it. She loves to share. And if you call her up for something, as you say, that's just a perfect example. She'll give you the shirt off her back and all the trial transcripts and whatever.
There's no question. And the other thing I like to tell people is where you really learn, if you're at a conference, if we ever get back live, try to, and the speakers or some people of that group are going out to dinner, go to dinner, sit at the bar with them. To me, that is the best knowledge we get, is over a bottle of wine and some good food. That's when the real good stuff comes out, not the stuff that you do on the dais.
Yeah, no, because that stuff is, as I say, it's a legitimate purpose, but and I don't think anybody's up there BSing, but you get kind of going and you're on a tear and, I kicked that expert's ass in trial. Well, when you read the transcripts, it's not always an ass kicking, but it's just you did what you had to do.
Right. I'll tell you what I love to read. I love to read opening statements. Mm-hmm. I find It's so interesting. And really what somebody's putting in their opening and in their closing argument is really what you have to prove in a case. Right?
Right.
All that other stuff that we do, who cares about it? It's really nothing. It's just those few things that we absolutely have to prove. And I love the way good trial lawyers do their opening statements. I find it fascinating.
Oh, every year, I go watch a handful of openings, closings, direct and cross if it's a certain type of witness, because that's the best way to learn, I feel.
Yeah.
And like, when I go on vacation, I bring trial testimony with me, and people are like, "Hey, don't you ever shut off your brain?" It's like, well, I don't want to read a Danielle Steele novel. I'm reading, I'm relaxing, I've got my Bloody Mary, but I'm reading trial. That's my read of choice.
That is, it's funny. I used to have a house on the Jersey Shore when I still lived up in New Jersey. And that's what I would read on the beach on the weekends. I would read trial testimony. And it wasn't necessarily cases on my cases. It was other people's opening statements. And I wanted to see how they went about, their thought process. Because we all have a different thought process. And everyone laughed at me because I was also sipping a cocktail when I read it. Don't get me wrong. But But it's fascinating. So that's a great tip for the younger, actually for every lawyer, is reach out and get those transcripts.
Oh, I still do. And, I just had a trial in January and February. And before I tried it, it wasn't even a similar case, but there were some good lawyers out of Florida and they just got a great verdict. And I thought, let me go see what they're doing in voir dire now. Let me see what they did in their opening. And I read it. I got all kinds of nuggets. It was an auto defect case, but a different defect, different manufacturer. And if I read a voir dire, I don't care who did it. I'm going to go, I never even thought of that. I'm going to do that. We just steal everybody's ideas because that's what we do.
It's rare. It's funny that you say that about voir dire because, we all have such different styles. Mm-hmm. And depending on what jurisdiction we're in will depend on what we can do. But I've never read a voir dire where I haven't either said, I never thought of that, or it led me to something that I never thought of or never done before. I think that's really brilliant. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Everybody's got their own style. So I can't read an opening, a closing, or a voir dire and not get something I am going to borrow and use.
Right. No, we just steal them. We don't even borrow them. And so for any lawyer who's asking questions like, wow, are there any good books on how to prepare an opening statement? I mean, I guess there are. Mm-hmm. There's David Ball. There's, I guess, to Keenan to a certain extent. I think Keith Mitnick's stuff is dead on. But you're saying go get people's voir dire, go get people's opening statements and read them.
Yeah, I mean I have found that to be better for me. I mean, there's no silver bullet, right? I've read all the books, Rules of the Road by Friedman, great book. I've read all the Keenan Ball books, some Jerry Spence books. I mean, we've watched it all, and you get a nugget from all of it. But I know when I'm reading a book and I get this concept, and maybe it's just the way I learn things, I go, well, I get the big picture concept, but I need to see it used. And so when I'm reading voir dire, I'm seeing it used. And that's just a better way for me to go, that's some good shit right there.
Yeah, especially voir dire.
Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, have you tried anything since the pandemic hit?
Not since. No, my last verdict came in at the end of February. We've been shut down. My office has had a verdict a few weeks ago. We're trying cases in Orange County.
Oh, great.
So I haven't been out yet. Someone in my office has. I was pleasantly surprised this morning. I had a tragic seatback trial set with a quadriplegic plaintiff in June or July. Pandemic wiped it out. I've been hearing through the grapevine, LA is not going to try cases till 2022. So I had a hearing this morning on Zoom with the courthouse. I've got a February 8th or 16th trial date, and the judge said, you're going.
Wow.
So let's hope.
Wow.
Maybe in February I'll get out. I'll have on the mask and all the stuff. But
well, let me ask you: the verdict your office just got. Did the lawyers who tried the case, did they offer any opinion of how they felt the pandemic affected the jury pool or the panel that they got?
Yeah, they felt it didn't. And what was interesting in Orange County, you can watch them. They have a link.
Oh.
And so it was one of my junior associates. It wasn't a huge case, but I mean, it was great. I think they offered 40 or 50 grand and he got like 300. So, I mean, it was a grand slam verdict for the kind of case it was.
Sure.
But his opinion when I debriefed him, and also to the extent I was watching it, it seemed normal, even though it didn't look normal. The witness gets on the stand after they spray it down. They take their mask off. The jury's behind plexiglass. The lawyers have a mask on. I know we're all concerned about that on a regular basis. But I've been reading across the country, there are still a lot of good verdicts coming down. Even though guys like us are paranoid to hide behind the mask, or the jury to hide behind the mask.
I tell you, I did a series of online focus groups in an attempt to try to figure out what people are thinking. And I really didn't see a big difference in jurors' attitudes than before. I mean, there were, listen, if you're going to have a case where someone's, magnifying their complaints, well, you're in trouble. I don't care when it is. But I didn't see that much of a difference. And I know that Greg Cusimano's doing them. I know that a couple other people are doing them, and they're finding kind of the same thing. Yeah. That there's, the biggest fear that we all have are who's going to show up for the jury veneer and who you're picking from. That is the biggest change, I think. But for jurors' attitudes, I didn't really see that big of a difference.
Yeah, which kind of doesn't surprise me. And it's not like I'm a PhD in any of this stuff. So, I don't know from a psychological perspective, but I've always thought, on the cases where objectively it is a serious injury or serious issue, that undeniable, you may disagree on whose fault it is. All jurors, they take that seriously. And I think every human being has a heart. We know they do. It's just some of them are buried really deep, and you got to peel away a lot of layers of that onion, and somewhere they're harder on their sleeve. And the pandemic's not going to change that. So I could appreciate that your research has shown it didn't show a big difference. The issue is which one of those onions is going to show up.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right.
Right.
And is the judge going to give you enough time to peel back the layer to find out what you really have?
Yeah. And that was, so at least with my firm's experience, and we've only had one trial during the pandemic, the judge allowed him to go. I mean, it went like a day and a half, which was a lot of time, especially. There was a lot of, a lot of cause challenges, because there were folks that did show up, but they did not want to be there because of the pandemic.
Yeah. We tried a case in Ohio, and we only had an hour for each side for voir dire, which I thought was a little tough, given half of the panel was in another room watching on videotape. And then we just would bring them in as we knocked people off. But at least in Ohio, they did a pretty good job. And also in Pennsylvania, where we were in a case, they did a pretty good job of knocking a lot of people out early on. If they were worried about COVID and they really didn't want to be there, they were just told not to show up. The court's belief, I think, is that we're going to have just the people in the middle, although I don't know that I agree with that, because I think most of the people that are really afraid of the virus seem to be more left-leaning people, which in theory seem to be good for verdicts, but I guess it all depends.
Yeah. Were you in federal court with that 1 hour, or state court?
State court.
Yeah. State court. Say, if it was federal court, that was the judge being liberal. He gave me 45 minutes.
Well, I come from New Jersey, where we don't even it's judge-driven voir dire. Oh. So in New Jersey, about 7 years ago, the Supreme Court gave us three open-ended questions we could ask.
I don't know. It's probably 3 years ago now, 4 years ago. I had my last federal court trial, because I avoid federal court like we all should. And I've had judges that allow me to do some voir dire. There was this guy in Albuquerque that was awesome, but in LA, I had this case, no voir dire. Just had to sit there and let him ask it. I should have just handed in my, cost waiver to the defense and said, can I go home now, please? Right.
That's unfortunately, that is federal court.
Yeah.
So now the new lawyer, or the lawyer is dipping his or her toe in the pond, is going to a seminar, getting any kind of opening statements, and contacting people like you. Mm-hmm. The next issue that I think is really scary, especially in what you do, is the cost of the case. How do you suggest lawyers deal with that, who aren't a success, haven't hit your level yet?
Yeah. I couldn't do it back in the old days at the level I do it now, because of success and credit lines and a combination of both. I know that, that first case I had, that first auto defect case, we actually, I think by the time we got the trial, we had, I don't know how I did so cheap in those days, because they're all, between 900 grand and $1 million now. That one, I think we had like 350 in it.
Right.
We didn't have that kind of money. But it was over like 2.5 years. building up. So it would be, you know, $5,000 here, you know, 10 grand there. And, you know, we just did it. I don't, you know, I mean, I think, well, let me back up. I know one way we did it. No one will give you a credit line when you need one.
Right.
It's they give them to you when you don't need them. So back in those days, we couldn't get a credit line. We wanted one. So I had, I don't know, 10 credit cards that had, you know, $5,000 and 10 grand. And, you know, so I had like $100,000 worth of, you know, 10 credit cards. My partner had the same. And I mean, that was our credit line in the old days.
So you really have to suck it up. I mean, it's scary. It's you have to learn not to sleep a lot, and but that's what you do.
Yeah, and if that scares folks, then you know, then you shouldn't do it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But really, what we do, I mean, it is entrepreneurial law, right? If you're a plaintiff's lawyer, you don't pay the bills if you don't win. You don't pay the bills if you don't get cases. And if you want to grow your firm, you know, most of us that I see that do what we do aren't overly, you know, risk adverse. They realize they're kind of entrepreneurs as well. So, you know, if it scares you to have those 10 credit cards and doing that, and I get it, then you know, you're just a little less entrepreneurial and maybe should go in another direction. But
you know, something that's interesting, when I guess I became I know I became a lawyer in '88, and I started doing nursing home work in, I don't know, '92. And, you know, looking at it and saying, all right, how are we doing this? And one of the thing I did, the first case I had, I brought one of the people who were the nursing home lawyer back then. And we brought him into a case, said, all right, let's do it. We'll pay the costs and let's work the case up and we'll split the fee 50-50. And we weren't necessarily in it to make money. We were in it just on a complete learning experience.
100%.
Is that something that you still do in the auto defect cases?
Yeah, you know, I mean, absolutely. Especially when you're starting out. If you have one of these cases like you do and you want to learn or grow from it, there may be a reason to refer it out if you can stay involved in it and be a trial with the person. Nothing wrong with that, because, you know, you're not going to retire on your first case. You know, and so I think that's real important. And I have a lot of lawyers that come to me with the case, you know, a significant amount of them like, hey, Brian, I want to refer you this case, but I want to be co-counsel and I want to be on the pleading and I want to go to the depots and I want to be at trial. And I have no problem with that.
Right. Because they want to learn so that the next time they can maybe even do it without you.
Yeah. And, you know, and you know, hopefully they can, you know, I mean, at this point, I just want to inspire people to do it. You know, we need more people doing what we do.
So let's get back to auto defect for a minute. Now I've a lot of listeners who are personal injury lawyers, premises, motor vehicle accidents. And when they look at the cases that are coming into their office, what should they be looking for to make a determination if this is also an auto defect case?
Man, so that is such a good question. You don't even know. I mean, seriously, I can't tell you how many times in my career I've had a client come to me with a dead child, a dead spouse, someone in a wheelchair, who were at another lawyer's office. That lawyer popped the $15,000 policy or the $100,000 policy and told them they had no case. And I don't mean a bad lawyer.
Right.
I mean, they just didn't see the case. Take it even a step further. I had one lawyer or client come to me. Child was killed in a crash. The lawyer hired an expert. Expert told them they had no case. They hired the wrong expert, and then that client came to me.
Oh.
I have dozens of those stories where those cases have settled for multiple 7 figures or gotten verdicts for 7 or 8 figures. People miss it. And so one thing, and I do this all the time, I'm doing it on webinars now, but in the old days, I'll fly around to people's law firms. I'll probably do it on Zoom now. I've got an hour presentation that I show people. Here's how you identify the cookie cutter auto defect cases without spending a penny. If the rear of the car looks like this and a person has this injury, you have a seatback case, I would file that case tomorrow without having an expert tell me anything. If you have a roof that looks like this and you've got this kind of an injury, and I go through what I call the cookie cutter defects, invariably when I'm doing that for lawyers and their intake team, their intake paralegals on what to look for, not all the time, but more than half the time, they'll go, we had that case a couple of years ago. We didn't even think to look for that.
Yeah.
and I see it all the time. So, how can they, I guess first people need to know, here's the general rule of thumb, because I'm not going to do a Zoom webinar for everybody that's listening to your podcast right now. If you have a catastrophic injury in a car crash, you have to talk to somebody about whether or not there's an auto defect case. Don't rely on yourself. I mean, that's the big picture. Catastrophic injury, car crash, I don't care what the car looks like. You need to explore that. That's probably the simple answer.
I love the idea that you'd be willing for obviously the higher volume auto firms to give them that type of webinar. I know that a firm came to us for hip implants, a law firm, and I wanna say it was Mark Saperstein's firm in Teaneck that does a lot of hip cases, and told our staff, and we had a lot of hip fractures of the elderly, of what hips were implanted, that some of them were almost black box cases. And we ended up looking based on their webinar to us. We probably sent them 10 or 15 cases. And the best part about that was that meant we got 10 or 15 referral fees of 6 figures each fee, later. So if someone is listening to this and they are involved in a high volume practice, they can reach out to you and get some more information from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got, 1 hour PowerPoint presentation with videos of crash testing.
Oh, that's great.
Everything to look for, to where, a 3-year-old will know how to identify an auto defect case when I get done doing that. Yeah. So
that's something that's really important for a lot of the younger, even the experienced lawyers out there, but a lot of the younger lawyers out there, something like that. So that's something they should definitely look to, either you or somebody in their locale. We were talking before we started about trials. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it, maybe finish up on that note. I know that I told you that I get a lot of these emails from people, who see I have multiple YouTube channels on persuasion and trial tips and nursing home minutes. And they say, is there something I can read to make my offers bigger? Or is there a book that could tell me how to make a demand that would get me more money? And we had a good laugh about what the answer was. Why don't you tell the listeners what the answer to that question is?
Yeah. Your answer was your answer voir dire or pick a jury, something like that?
Yeah. My answer is voir dire and opening.
Voir dire and opening. And we did laugh, and it is true. You've got to go to the school of hard knocks and try cases and learn. I mean, I look back at my first trials and my second and my third, and then you start changing things, and it was just like the things we used to do. I mean, even if you're winning, I did a lot of stupid stuff, and you can't get insurance companies to take you seriously unless you've got some verdicts. And even if you lose, they respect you. It's not like losing's a bad thing. You got to go to trial. And
I keep telling people that they're talking about phenomenal books like Nick Rowley's book, Running with the Bulls. Great book. It's just not going to get your bigger settlements because Allstate knows who tries cases. And if you brought Nick Rowley in, maybe you get a bigger settlement, but that's not what you're doing.
Because he's tried a boatload of those TBI cases.
Exactly right.
And he's won some huge and he's lost some huge, and he's not afraid to lose. They know that, but they weren't writing him those checks 20 years ago.
No.
He had to go run around in his chicken suit up in San Luis Obispo and get that med-mal verdict, which is just a great story and a great YouTube video in and of itself.
But I mean, I think I've talked to every, besides people who like us have tried a lot of these cases, you talk to every consultant. You talk to everybody who's up there giving a seminar, and they're all going to tell you the same thing. If you want to be taken seriously and you want to get the bigger settlements, you've got to try the case. It's just that simple.
Yeah, and you told me a great story ahead of time when you were out on your own, and I don't know if you want to share that on your.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. I mean, we had decided.
It's such a great story. So tell your story on how your verdicts got better and settlements better with your life story.
Yeah, we had decided, we're going back in the mid 2000s, that I and another firm had 60% of the docket of cases in our state, of nursing home cases. And the insurance companies were starting to give us lesser offers. And it didn't make sense to me. We owned the docket more than they did. So we decided not to settle cases. We were going to try cases. The problem with that, of course, was I went over a year without making a dollar, which caused all sorts of other issues, probably why I'm divorced twice, but caused all other issues. And the first trial we tried after that year and a half, we call it no cause in New Jersey. We lost. So of course I went home and thought to myself, my life is over. Everything I'm about is horrible. The next trial was probably to date the best nursing home case I've ever had. And the jury came back with 475 and I was sick. I expected 4 million at a minimum. And remember, there's no caps in New Jersey. The next one after that was 700,000. Then it became million, then multi-million. And then the quarter after we tried 4 cases, I think I made more money in that first quarter than we did ever before that, because now the insurance company said, okay, he's figuring it out. He's trying the case. We better pay him off.
Yeah.
And, Steve Levin out of Chicago, I don't know if you know Steve, Levin and Perconti. I had Steve on the podcast a couple months ago, and Steve said his position is when he's trying to settle the case, he's not trying to get them to give him money. He wants them to understand they're buying a release from him. And that release is a valuable piece of it, a valuable document. And they've got to pay enough money to get that release. And I thought, wow, that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, it is. And your story, I mean, that sums it up. And everybody has got a similar story like that. You've got to try cases. You will necessarily get better at it. You will get better verdicts. I mean, we all get better and better verdicts, the more cases we try.
Sure.
Which equals better settlements. So, you can't read it. I see a lot of lawyers going to all these seminars and trial lawyer college classes, and that's all fine and dandy, but it's like the person with 20 degrees, 20 letters after their name. So what? Okay, now you're an educated derelict, but you still got to go out and do it.
That's right.
And so, you got to get in the courtroom, man.
So we'll leave it at that for everybody out there who's listening. Trials are fun. I mean, they're just fun. You have about 5 seconds, at least I do, of feeling, oh God, why am I doing this? Yeah. What prompted me to ever want to go into this? And then boom, then it's on. And it's just fun. So do it.
And facing that little fear is kind of fun too. And I think a lot of lawyers don't admit what you just admitted. It's like, no, I'm never nervous. I don't do this. And maybe they're not. I don't know. I heard, I won't name names. I heard some big time guy say that. And I'm like, okay, well, good for you. I think young lawyers have to know and appreciate, I don't care how many trials you've done. Yeah, there's a nervous component. Can't be paralyzing, but there's a component. But as you say, the minute you start, that's out the window. And now you got an e-ticket at Disneyland and you're just having fun. And even makes it more fun at the end of the day because you kind of face down that fear you had. And it just is so empowering. So
I mean, for me, it's that moment when I have to stand up and say the jury is satisfactory. And I know we're leaving voir dire, and I'm the first person to talk next to open. It's those minutes where I'm like, oh, my mom wanted me to be a doctor. Why didn't I just be a doctor? What was every case. Yeah. That and somebody knocking saying the jury has a question is the other time that I want to be sick.
Oh, I'm still on that. I don't like that. I mean, if that bell rings and there's a knock and it's within an hour or less. No.
So we'll leave it with this. I know how busy you are, Brian. First of all, thank you for joining us on The Jury Thinks What. We'd love to have you on again to talk about some more issues. But if you're out there and you want to dip your toe into that pond, talk to somebody who's swimming in the pond and lifeguarding the pond already, and get some really good information from them and get trial transcripts. And whatever you do, start trying the cases, and everything's going to work out for you. Does that make sense?
That's the bottom line right there. That's great advice, Saul. Hey, thanks for having me on today, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, Brian. Take care. Well, that was really fun half an hour, everyone. I want to thank Brian Chase for giving us just some incredible information and incredible advice to the lawyers out there who are looking to dip their toe in the pond and expand what they're doing. Again, this is The Jury Thinks What, a podcast by trial lawyers for trial lawyers, available on the Lawyer Minds ecosystem everywhere you get your podcasts. And you can also watch them on the Lawyer Minds webpage as well as the YouTube network. I am Saul Gruber from Gruber Trial Consulting, the host of The Jury Thinks What. And I ask you to take a look at our YouTube channel. We have The Art of Persuasion, Nursing Home Minute, as well as trial tips. And one of the videos drops every week, and there's always something or a nugget for trial lawyers to watch. And again, please subscribe to our to get this podcast. And I look forward to seeing everyone in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us.
That concludes another episode of the Jury Thinks What podcast, part of the Lawyer Minds ecosystem. Thank you for listening, and we truly hope it was worth your time. Please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Explore the other content that Lawyer Minds has to offer, and engage with us on social media. Your feedback and ideas are always welcomed. See you next time.